So let's talk about your plans here. Obviously, you're here for a reason. You were in Congress for one term. We'll get back to that in a moment. But my understanding is you're ready to launch a new campaign. You're ready to get involved with this run for this Senate seat. Do tell.
No, I'm more than ready. I'm here to break the news here on your show that I am throwing my hat in the ring for the 2024 open Senate seat in Michigan, our first open seat in a decade and probably the last until 2038. And in the past 50 years, there have been 16 Senate races here. A Republican has won one once. But Massachusetts, Delaware, they've had Republican senators more recently than we have. And I think it's essential for the people of Michigan and for this country that we change direction. Now, you're going to have a lot of hard questions for me, and I look forward to answering those. But frankly, my wife and I had our first son 6 months ago. We're looking at the uncertainty all around us, whether the conflict in the Middle East that has sprung up anew, the rising debt, inflation, interest rates, the way those are all painting a very bleak picture of where we're going to be. And while our focus is going to be on 2024, we need folks in office who are looking at 2050 and how we make sure that we are by then in the middle of the next great American century and not on the decline that it looks like appears inevitable, but with the right policies and the right people in office, we can ultimately reverse.
All right, so let's dive right into it then, Peter. Your first vote in Congress, which I say cost you a re-election quite obviously. Your first vote in Congress as a freshman member was to impeach Donald Trump. You're one of 10. How do you get around that now? Donald Trump's up by 40 points in the Republican primaries. He's leading in Michigan, according to the New York Times, in head-to-head battles with Joe Biden. How do you tell Trump voters, which are, staunch in their support of the former president, that you're the right guy when they feel like you cut them off at the knees?
Oh, I appreciate you asking that. January 3rd was the day I was sworn into office. January 6th came just 3 short days after that. And what I saw there disappointed me. It frustrated me. I felt like it cast a shadow over all of the accomplishments of the Trump administration. But more frustrating to me was the way that I saw so many of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle say one thing behind closed doors and another thing out in the open. And I think that's the exact same type of hypocrisy that a lot of President Trump's supporters, fervent supporters, are sickened by when they see it in their leaders in D.C. And my view, my goal was to not be that, was to say the same thing in the open as I'm saying and having conversations with folks, when those doors are closed. Now, when it comes to President Trump, I've always tried to be somebody who calls balls and strikes, right? I will call him out when I see something wrong, and I thought January 6th was wrong. I'll also defend him when I think that he is being unfairly attacked, which happens all the time. We just filed an amicus brief in Western District here in Michigan because some Democratic activists are trying to make sure he is prevented from even getting on the ballot using, laws that are close to a century and a half old. So when it comes
in retrospect, let me ask you this, though. Let me ask you this. If you could go back to that vote, an impeachment vote, it was your first vote at all in Congress, and it did, I think it's fair to say, cost you that seat in West Michigan, 3rd Congressional District, because you were primaried out. The gentleman who won the primary did not win the general election. That seat turned blue. Do you stand by the vote? Was it the right vote, or would you say, look, maybe you made the vote in haste? Is there anything you could say to Trump supporters? Because, look, it's going to be an awfully hard sell for you to go to the Trump supporters and say, with your hat in hand, say, look, this is what happened. This is why I did it. Would you do it again?
I stand by it. My regret is that we had to have the vote in the first place. Obviously, I regret not being in the 118th Congress where we actually had a Republican majority and could move forward to have that same degree of accountability brought towards President Biden, who has done far greater things to bring disgrace to that office. But again, my view on January 6th comes from being there. Comes from the frustration that I felt at seeing an embarrassment both at home, rivaled only by the Afghanistan withdrawal that came a short 8 months later in terms of damaging our credibility on the national stage. When it comes to 2024, I'm going to support the Republican nominee, and that's going to make a lot of the Lincoln Project and Never Trump folks very, very unhappy. But I will support that Republican nominee because we need to make Joe Biden a one-term president. And in reality, whoever wins this seat is going to be in office for 2 years after whoever the next president is, whether it's President Trump in his second non-consecutive term, as seems increasingly likely given the polls, or if it's President Biden, who will also be a lame duck in his second term.
Yeah. So have you ever made an effort, have you reached out, Peter, to Donald Trump to discuss any of this? Wouldn't even take your phone call.
It might surprise you, Steve. I've never met the man. We didn't have a relationship. None of this is personal. This all comes down to my view and my belief that you need folks in office who are willing to call balls and strikes equally and not take a different tone depending on who's doing it, whether it's somebody on their side of the aisle or the opposing. Because that type of flip-flopping I saw all too often, and you're seeing it from Democratic members as well, especially when it comes to what we're seeing with anti-Semitism on campuses across the country. Keeping their mouth shut when it's a member of their party doing something they disagree with, and then going to the ramparts and waving a bloody flag if it's coming from that other side. So I think that consistency is essential. I mean, that's the only way we're actually going to get past, focusing solely on what's happening in the here and now, while our policies are setting us on a path to long-term decline. Because the Chinese don't have that problem. I mean, they are looking and planning out decades ahead. And I didn't meet a single person in Washington who had any sense or any focus on a timeline beyond the next election cycle. And even that was considered long-term. They were mostly focused on surviving the day, surviving the week, surviving the next little thing that came up.